The park was nearly empty on that Tuesday afternoon in November, the way parks in the cold always become when the season has stopped softening its edges and most people have found warmer reasons to be somewhere else. The oak trees along the main path had surrendered their leaves 2 weeks before, and they stood now in the flat gray light like patient witnesses to something that had not yet happened, their bare branches drawing fine and complicated patterns against a sky the color of old pewter. A few pigeons moved along the path below with their characteristic distracted urgency, arriving and departing from nothing in particular, as earnest and purposeless as they always were. The fountain at the center of the park had been shut off for the season, and the stone basin held only a shallow skin of water and the darkened silhouettes of leaves that had blown in from the street and settled there as though they belonged. Eli Carter came through the east gate at 3:47 in the afternoon with his backpack on both shoulders and his chin tucked slightly toward his chest against the wind, the posture of a boy who had been thinking seriously about something since second period and had not yet finished thinking it through. He was 11 years old and small for his age, though nobody who spent more than 5 minutes watching him tended to think of him that way. There was something in the quality of his attention, in the particular steadiness of his dark eyes when they settled on a thing, that suggested a person who had been paying close attention to the world for considerably longer than 11 years. His backpack was navy blue and worn to a lighter shade along the straps where they had rubbed against his jacket over hundreds of mornings. His sneakers were clean despite being 2 full seasons old, the toes scuffed to a pale gray that no amount of cleaning was going to fully reverse, but the laces had been replaced twice with laces from the dollar bin at the corner store and were knotted so carefully at the toes they almost looked like they had been designed that way. His jacket was dark green quilted nylon, too light for November but buttoned all the way to the top, the collar turned up against the cold. If this story is already reaching something in you, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe right now. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from tonight. I love hearing from every one of you, and it helps stories like this one find the people who need them most. On his left wrist, he wore a man's silver watch with a cracked crystal face and hands that had stopped at 2:14 and would never move again. The watch had not worked in 18 months. He wore it every single day anyway. He knew this park the way children know the places they pass through every day, not in the deliberate way you know a landmark but in the wordless way that comes from repetition so complete that a place stops being outside you and starts being part of the landscape of your own body. He knew which bench on the left side of the main path had a loose back slat that wobbled if you leaned on it carelessly. He knew the water fountain near the east gate ran warm for the first 30 seconds before the cold caught up to itself. He knew that the pigeons in this park were not afraid of backpacks but were deeply and consistently suspicious of umbrellas, a fact he had tested once on a rainy Wednesday in September when there was nothing else to occupy the time. He knew that if you walked the path close to the hedgerow on the south side in the early morning, you could sometimes see a rabbit sitting very still near the base of the hedge, watching you with the absolute confidence of something that has decided it is not in any particular danger. He had been walking through this park on his way home from Jefferson Middle School every school day for the past 18 months. 6 blocks north, 12 minutes at his normal pace, 25 if he stopped at the stone picnic table near the fountain to do his homework before heading home. He stopped most days. Home before 5 meant an empty apartment, and empty apartments had a quality to the silence in them that the park did not have. Heavier. More shaped around the outline of something that used to be there. He had started stopping in the park in October of the year before. That was when his father died. Marcus Carter had been 38 years old. He had worked for 12 years at the Midland Distribution Center on the south side of the city, a long shift job that started at 5 in the morning and ended at 2 in the afternoon, which had always meant that he was the one home when Eli got back from school. The one who had something warm on the stove and a question ready about how the day had gone. He had been the kind of father who asked in specific terms, not how was school in the general way that expects a general answer but what happened today that you did not expect, and did you finish the assignment you were worried about on Monday, and tell me about the book you are reading, not just what it is about but what you think about it. He had the same dark eyes as Eli and the same quality of still attention. And when Marcus Carter listened to you, you had the clear and unmistakable sense that all of him was present, that there was no part of him managing the conversation while thinking about something else. He was entirely there. Eli had always known this without having words for it, the same way you know warmth before you know the word for fire. The cancer had appeared in his esophagus without warning and without any of the usual explanations that people reach for when something like this happens, because Marcus Carter had never smoked, had eaten well and exercised and attended his health checkups with the conscientious reliability of a man who understood that he had people depending on him. The diagnosis arrived in late March, and by September of the same year the cancer had moved further than the doctors had initially hoped it would not, and by mid-October, Marcus was gone, and Eli had been 11 years old for exactly 3 weeks. His mother, Diane Carter, had held everything together in the way that women who have been given no other option learn to hold everything together, which is with both hands and no acknowledgement of the weight, because acknowledging the weight does not help anyone and there are children watching. Diane was 36 years old and had the kind of face that had been open and pretty before that year and was still pretty now, but with something added to it, a layer of careful composure over something that had been rearranged by grief and by necessity and by a great deal of late nights doing arithmetic. She worked the opening shift at Crystal Clean Laundry and Dry Cleaning on Birch Avenue 6 days a week, 6 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon. 3 evenings a week she crossed town to clean offices at the Midland Corporate Park, a job that did not end until 10:30 at night, and on those evenings she came home quiet and careful with her movements, the way you move when you are very tired and have decided not to make anything of it. On the office cleaning nights, Eli made dinner. He was a capable cook for an 11-year-old, not in any trained sense but in the way of someone who had been paying close attention to the people who cooked around him and who understood that getting it right mattered in tangible ways, that undercooked chicken and burned pasta were not the same as mistakes at school. He had learned to handle the oven with its slight lean to the right, had learned that the front left burner ran hotter than it said it did, had learned the particular way his sister Jade needed her food cut when she was tired, which was smaller than she would ask for on her own because when she was tired she miscalculated things. Jade was 7 years old and had enormous dark eyes and a laugh that made adults in grocery stores turn around to see where it was coming from. She was in 2nd grade at Birch Avenue Elementary and was currently holding the position that ketchup counted as a vegetable, which Eli had been carefully arguing against since September without measurable progress. Their apartment was on the 4th floor of a building at 318, Birch Avenue, apartment 4B. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen just wide enough for one person to cook without trouble if that person kept their elbows close, and a living room with a window that faced east and caught the early light on clear mornings in a way that was genuinely beautiful even when everything else was difficult. Diane had covered the walls with framed photographs and 2 prints she had bought at the community center art sale 3 years ago, and the effect was of a space that had been cared for with intention, a place where someone had decided that warmth and dignity did not require square footage and had held to that decision. On the refrigerator, held in place by a small yellow sun magnet that Jade had chosen at a science museum gift shop, was a photograph of Marcus Carter at 34, sitting at a picnic table in summer, laughing at something off camera with his head tilted back and his whole face open in it. Eli had walked past that photograph 1,000 times on the way to the table or the sink or the refrigerator itself. Every time, there was a beat of recognition that was also something he did not have a precise word for, something that had changed its texture over the past 18 months from the sharp intake of grief to something quieter and more permanent, like a room in a house you had learned to live in even though the door no longer opened all the way. The money was tight in a way that was never spoken of directly but was present in specific and detailed ways if you were paying attention. Eli was paying attention. He had noticed, without anyone telling him to notice, that the grocery list had changed in small ways over the past year, that the brand of cereal in the cabinet was different, that the treats that had appeared in his lunch without occasion were now occasion only. He had noticed that when Jade's school shoes wore through, Diane had found a near-perfect pair at the community thrift sale on Oak Street rather than at the shoe store on Main where they had always gone before. He had noticed that the heat in the apartment was kept at 66 degrees instead of the 68 that had been the standard before, and that Diane wore an extra sweater in the evenings without commenting on it. He did not bring any of this up. He understood in the wordless way that children understand the things no one has explicitly told them, that his job was to be the kind of son and brother who did not create additional weight. He made his lunches the night before on the cleaning days. He finished his homework without being reminded. He checked the apartment door was locked before he left in the mornings. He set his sister's school things by the door the night before so that nothing was missing in the rush. He carried his father's watch because someone needed to. That was who Eli Carter was on the afternoon he walked through the east gate of the park at 3:47 on the second Tuesday of November, with his backpack on both shoulders and his chin down against the cold. The day had been an ordinary one at Jefferson Middle, which meant it had been a mixture of things that mattered and things that did not. He had done well on the history quiz that he had studied for on Sunday evening at the picnic table while Jade was still outside playing in the last real warmth of the year. He had eaten lunch with James, who had conducted another personal experiment in accelerated consumption and finished in just under 4.5 minutes, which was slower than his record but still impressive by any reasonable measure. He had talked with Priya during the walk between buildings about a book she was reading and a book he was reading and the question of whether two books that were nothing alike could still somehow be about the same thing, which was the kind of conversation Eli found that he could sustain indefinitely and which made the 12 minutes between buildings feel like 2. He arrived at the stone picnic table near the fountain at 3:52, dropped his backpack, and pulled the front zipper for his homework folder. The math worksheet was half finished from the lunch period, when James had made him laugh hard enough to lose 15 minutes to it. He pulled it out, smoothed it on the table, and uncapped his pen. He had been sitting for approximately 4 minutes when he looked up. He could not have said afterward exactly what made him look. It was not a sound, not precisely. More like a quality of attention in the air, a particular held stillness that something was making near the far end of the main path, the kind of stillness that is not the same as quiet but is in fact its opposite, the active and effortful containment of something that wants to not be contained. He had felt it before. He recognized it the way you recognize something that has been part of your own interior experience. On the bench at the far end of the path, about 30 yards from where he sat, there was a woman. She was old. Not in the softened, comfortable way that some older people wear their age, with the ease of people who have made their peace with the years and carry them without friction, but in the way of someone whose age had been added to by things beyond the ordinary accumulation of time, a depth in the face, a considered quality in the way she held her body, as though every position had been arrived at deliberately. She was wearing a good wool coat, dark charcoal gray, well made and well kept, with the particular integrity of something that had been properly cared for over a long period of years. Her silver hair was pulled back neatly at the base of her neck. She had leather gloves, dark brown, supple-looking, which she was not wearing, holding them instead in her lap with both hands, the gloves folded together without purpose, the way you hold something when you have set it down in the middle of doing something and have not yet decided whether to pick it back up. Her posture was the posture of a woman who had spent many years carrying herself well and was carrying herself well right now, even though everything else in the picture was working in the other direction. She was crying. Not dramatically. Not in the way that reaches for attention or announces itself. She was crying the way people cry when they have finally given themselves permission to cry in this specific moment and this specific place because there is no one near enough to notice and because the weight of not crying has simply exceeded what can be held without visible consequence. Her face was turned slightly toward the fountain, her jaw set with some residual effort, her lips pressed together in a way that suggested she had been keeping things in for considerably longer than this afternoon. The tears moved quietly down her face and were not being attended to at all, because attending to them would have required an acknowledgement of their presence and she had not gotten to that part yet. The wind moved through the bare oak trees. A city bus rumbled past on the street beyond the east wall. Eli looked at his math worksheet. He read the same problem he had been reading before he looked up. He did not process any part of it. In the 4 minutes that followed, he watched 6 people pass the bench where the woman sat. The first was a man in his 40s in running clothes and earbuds, moving at a comfortable training pace on his regular circuit of the park path, and he passed the bench without slowing and without looking, the woman on it no more present to him than the empty benches he had passed before her. The second was a young woman in a business coat walking fast with a paper coffee cup in one hand and a phone in the other, eyes down, and she went by the bench at the same speed she had been walking since the gate. The third was a woman in her 30s pushing a stroller, who came along the path, saw the bench and the woman seated on it, and made a small deliberate adjustment to her course, angling the stroller toward the center of the path in the way people angle away from something they have decided is not their concern and do not want to be made to feel it should be. She did not look at the woman on the bench as she passed. She looked at the middle distance and kept moving. The fourth and fifth were teenagers, two boys maybe 14 years old, one of them eating chips from a bag and the other walking with his hands in his pockets. The one with the chips looked at the bench as they passed and said something low to his companion, and his companion looked too and made a sound that was either a laugh or the beginning of one, and the first boy said something else, and they moved on without slowing. Eli could not hear the words from where he sat, but he understood their quality from the angle of the look and the quality of the sound that followed it, which was the sound of something being made small. The woman on the bench did not look up as they passed. The sixth was a city parks employee, a man in his 30s in a dark green uniform with a city logo on the shoulder and a clipboard under his arm. He had been making a circuit of the park doing the end-of-day maintenance check on the benches and the trash receptacles, and when he reached the bench where the woman sat he stopped and looked at her with the evaluating expression of someone encountering a variable that had not been on his checklist. He said something. Eli could see the posture of the words from across the park, the upright official posture of someone delivering policy to a member of the public rather than speaking to a person. The woman turned her face toward him slowly. She said something brief. The man looked at his clipboard, made a notation, and moved on to the next receptacle. He did not ask whether she was all right. He did not slow his pace after he passed her. He walked the path to the next stop as though the exchange had concluded to everyone's mutual satisfaction. Eli set down his pen. He sat still at the picnic table for a moment, looking at the math worksheet he had not processed and would not be processing this afternoon. Then he looked at the bench again, at the woman with her silver hair and her good wool coat and her gloves held in her lap without purpose, at the careful way she was containing something that had been pressing against containment for what felt, even from this distance, like a very long time. He thought about the bench outside the hospital entrance 18 months ago. Not this park, not this bench, but the one outside the main entrance on the south side of the building, the one where he had sat with his Aunt Carol for 40 minutes on a cold October evening while things were being determined inside. He thought about what it had felt like to be sitting there in that specific way, to be at the center of something enormous that was not visible from the outside unless you were looking for it, while the world moved through the hospital entrance on its ordinary business, a woman on her phone, a man with coffee, a taxi pulling up and a taxi pulling away, none of them knowing. Not because they were unkind. Because there was no way to know what the inside of someone else's large thing looked like from the outside, not unless you were someone who had learned to look for the signs. Eli had learned to look for the signs. He thought about what it had felt like in that 40 minutes to have someone come and simply sit down beside him. Not to say the right thing, because there were no right things. Not to fix it, because nothing could be fixed. Just to sit. To be present without requirement. His Aunt Carol had done that, had sat with her hand resting near his on the bench without touching him because she had understood somehow that he needed the proximity more than the contact. That had been the thing that had made it possible to continue sitting there while the minutes passed and the world went about its business around them. He picked up his backpack from the picnic table and settled it on both shoulders. He walked across the park toward the bench at the far end of the path. His footsteps on the paving stones were quiet in the cold air. She did not hear him until he was a few feet away. When she heard him, she turned her head, and the expression on her face made its automatic adjustment, the brief practiced movement of someone who has been somewhere private and suddenly registered that they are not alone. She brought herself back to the surface. It took about 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds Eli saw all of it clearly, the grief and the effort to contain it and the practiced efficiency of someone who knew how to do this because she had been called upon to do it before. He stopped at a comfortable distance. He did not look directly at her face. He looked at the fountain basin and the leaves in the water. "You don't have to sit alone," he said. He said it quietly, without weight or performance. Not as a question and not exactly as an offer, more as a simple statement of available fact, The way you might tell someone on a bus that the seat beside you is empty, not pressing, not expecting anything, just naming what was true. He had not planned the words before he said them. They had come out the way things come out when you stop managing them and simply say the true thing. The woman was quiet. The wind moved through the oak trees. A pigeon landed on the path a few feet away, regarded them both with the impartial assessment of a pigeon who has seen a great many things from park benches, and moved on. "That is a kind thing to say," the woman said finally. Her voice was low and steady, with the slight roughness in it that voices carry when they have been managing something for a while. She had the bearing of someone for whom composure was not an occasional achievement but a lifetime habit. Eli could feel it in the way she sat and the way she spoke, composure that had been practiced and refined until it had become not something she put on but something she simply was. And yet it had slipped in the last hour. He could see where it had slipped. He could see the effort she was making now to reassemble it, not for vanity or pride but for the same reason people who have held things together for a long time continue to hold them, because the holding itself has become the shape of them. She was looking at him now with a careful attention. Not suspicion exactly, more like the measured assessment of someone who has learned over many years that most people who approach strangers want something, and who was in the process of determining what this particular stranger wanted. He met her eyes for a moment and then looked back at the fountain. "You can sit," she said. "If you would like." "Okay," he said. He sat down on the far end of the bench, leaving 1.5 feet of space between them. He set his backpack in his lap and rested his hands on top of it and looked at the fountain and the leaves in the basin and the sky behind the bare trees, which had gone from gray to a pale and luminous silver as the afternoon moved toward 4 o'clock. They sat in silence. It was not the uncomfortable silence of two people waiting for something to happen. It was the silence of a space that had been made available and was being inhabited carefully. "Do you come here every day?" she asked. Her voice was a little steadier than it had been. "Most days," he said. "After school. And you do your homework at that table?" "I saw you." "Usually." He paused. "I was going to." He did not finish. She did not press him to. "What grade are you in?" she asked. "Sixth. Jefferson Middle School." He glanced toward her briefly. "It's about 6 blocks north." She nodded slightly, looking at the fountain basin. "My daughter went to Jefferson. A very long time ago." A pause. She said it the way people say things they have said many times, the words worn smooth by repetition, but the thing inside them not worn at all. "She loved it there." Eli waited a moment. "Is she still around?" A pause. Something shifted in the woman's posture, a nearly imperceptible settling, the adjustment of someone taking on a familiar weight. "No," she said. "She is not." She said it plainly, without loading the words or dressing them. Just the flat, carried fact of it. The way Eli had heard his mother say certain things in the months after October, with that particular flatness that meant the word had been said so many times that the saying of it had become its own kind of grief. "I'm sorry," Eli said. "Thank you," she said. She adjusted the gloves in her lap with a small, unconscious movement, folding them and unfolding them slightly. "How old are you?" 11. She looked at him again, the same measured attention, and now something else had entered it, something that was closer to recognition than to assessment. There was something in his face, Eli understood, that she was reading. The same way he had read something in hers from across the park. "You have a thoughtful face for 11, she said. "People say that sometimes." "Is it a burden?" He considered the question seriously, the way he did when someone asked him something he had not been asked before and he wanted to give it an honest answer. "Sometimes," he said. "But it is easier here than other places." "Why is it easier here?" He looked at the fountain. "Nobody needs anything from me here," he said. "It is just the park." She was quiet for a moment. Something moved through her expression. "No," she said. "I suppose they don't." He reached into the front pocket of his backpack and found the granola bar he had saved from lunch, peanut butter chocolate chip, the kind Jade also liked and for whom he had been keeping half. Tonight he would find something else for her. He held the bar out toward the woman without ceremony. "It is not much," he said. "But you should probably have something." She looked at the granola bar in his hand. Then she looked at him. In her expression, in the split second before the composure came back up and resettled itself, was something that went past the careful bearing she had been maintaining all afternoon. Something that dropped briefly to a layer below it, something real and unguarded and a little bit undone. "I am not hungry," she said. "You do not have to be hungry," he said. "Sometimes you just should have something anyway." She looked at him for another moment. Then she took the granola bar from his hand. She did not open it. She held it in her lap alongside the gloves, both hands around it now, and she looked at the fountain. They sat together in the deepening November afternoon as the light shifted by degrees from silver to pale gold along the horizon above the city buildings to the west. The pigeons moved along the path before them, arriving and departing from nothing. The wind came and went through the bare oak trees in the long, low sound of something breathing. After a while she said, quietly, not quite to him and not quite to herself, "I come here every year on this day." He did not ask why. He waited. "My husband loved this park," she said. "He used to walk here in the mornings before the day began. He said it helped him think." She paused. "He has been gone for 11 years now. And I still come here on the days that mattered to him. I am not sure anymore whether I am coming for him or for myself." She paused again. "Today would have been our 50th anniversary." Eli sat with that for a moment. 50 years. He thought about what 50 years of something looked like, the shape of it, the weight of it. He thought about the way his father had looked at his mother across the kitchen table in the ordinary evenings, without fanfare, just looking, the kind of look that was so habitual it had become invisible to them but which Eli had noticed and held on to. "That is a long time to love someone," he said. She turned her head and looked at him fully for the first time. Not the assessing look of earlier, not the composed public face. Something more direct. Something that registered him as a person of specific substance rather than a child who had happened to sit down. "Yes," she said. "It is." Another silence. The kind that had begun to feel less like emptiness and more like a room they were both standing in, something with actual walls and a temperature of its own. "What is your name?" she asked. "Eli," he said. "Eli Carter." She held the granola bar in both hands and looked at the fountain basin and the leaves in the water and the bare trees beyond it and the pale gold light thinning at the horizon. Then she said, with the specific care of someone offering something small that is not actually small, "My name is Agnes." "Hi, Agnes." "Hello, Eli." The last of the light was going now, the sky shifting from pale gold to the deep and quiet blue that precedes dark, and the city around the park was beginning to come on one light at a time, the yellow windows of buildings appearing against the dusk like small and private announcements of warmth. Eli knew he needed to be home by 5 to start dinner and check on Jade's reading assignment. He had exactly 11 minutes if he left now. He had exactly 3 if he wanted to leave on time. He did not move. He sat on the bench beside the woman named Agnes and watched the light go the rest of the way and thought about nothing in particular, and beside him she held the granola bar in both hands and her leather gloves in her lap and had stopped crying and was simply present, the same way he was simply present. 2 people sitting in the cold and the almost dark at the end of a Tuesday in November with the park going quiet around them. After a while she looked at the watch on his wrist. The cracked crystal, the stopped hands. She looked at it for a moment without asking. He noticed her noticing. "It was my dad's," he said. "It stopped." "When?" 18 months ago. He looked at the watch face. "I keep meaning to get it fixed. But I do not know. I think maybe I like it the way it is." She was quiet. Then she said, "Because it marks something." "Yeah," he said. "Something like that." She looked at the watch for another moment. There was an understanding in her expression that had no need of further words and so offered none. At 4:51, Eli stood from the bench. "I have to go," he said. "My sister gets home soon." Agnes looked up at him. In the fading light her face was composed again, the bearing reassembled, but something in it had shifted from what it had been when he arrived. The held and guarded quality had eased, only slightly, but enough to be visible. She looked less like someone concentrating on staying intact and more like someone who had been allowed to simply exist in a space for a while without having to manage it. "Of course," she said. He settled his backpack on both shoulders. He looked at the fountain one more time and then at her. "Will you be here tomorrow?" he asked. She looked at him with the slight surprise of someone who had not expected the question, and then with something that was considering the truth of what she might say, and then with a small and careful expression that was not quite a smile but was in the neighborhood of one. "I do not usually come 2 days in a row," she said. He nodded. "Okay." He started down the path toward the east gate. "Eli." He stopped and turned. Agnes was looking at him from the bench, her hands in her lap with the gloves and the unopened granola bar she had not asked for and had accepted anyway. In the dusk, her silver hair and her dark charcoal coat made her look like part of the park itself, like something the park had always contained and that he had simply not been paying the right kind of attention to notice until today. "Thank you," she said. "For sitting." "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I wanted to." He turned and walked toward the gate. Behind him, the bench was a shape in the darkening park. The fountain was still. The pigeons had gone wherever pigeons go when the light is finished. The city came on around them in all its ordinary illuminated warmth, oblivious and beautiful and humming with the enormous indifferent energy of people who had their own evenings to get home to. Eli Carter walked through the gate and turned north toward Birch Avenue with the broken watch on his wrist and his backpack on his shoulders and the math worksheet he had not finished in his front pocket, thinking about a woman named Agnes who came to the park on the day that had mattered and held her gloves in her lap without purpose and held a granola bar she had not asked for in both hands like it was something she intended to keep. He did not know who she was. He did not know that her full name was Agnes Whitfield, or that the modest name on the stone fountain plaque he had walked past 100 times, in memory of Robert Whitfield, who believed in this community, was the name of her late husband. He did not know that the park itself, its benches and its paths and its oak trees and its east gate and its fountain that ran warm for 30 seconds before it went cold, had been donated to the city 37 years ago by the Whitfield Foundation in Robert's name, and that Agnes Whitfield had sat on this specific bench with him every year on their anniversary for 26 years before Robert died, and that she had sat on it alone every year for the 11 years since, and that she came in a plain coat and without her driver or her assistant because this was the 1 hour of the year she had decided belonged only to her and to the memory of a man she had loved for 50 years. He did not know that Agnes Whitfield had founded Whitfield Industries at 31 years old with a single property management contract and 2 employees in a borrowed office space and had built it over 4 decades into a real estate and development company with operations in 9 states and a valuation that 7 financial publications had estimated at somewhere between $800 million and $1.2 billion, depending on the quarter and who was running the numbers. He did not know that her photograph had appeared in Forbes, in Fortune, in the Wall Street Journal, and in the business sections of 17 regional newspapers, and that her name was on the donor wall of the Children's Hospital 2 miles east and on the founding board of the University Scholarship Fund that had put 347 first-generation students through college in the last 12 years. He did not know any of it. He knew that her name was Agnes and that she had come to the park on the day that mattered and that she had accepted a granola bar from a boy she had never met and had held it in her hands like it was worth holding, and that when he had said you do not have to sit alone, she had, after a moment, believed him. That was what he knew. On the bench at the far end of the main path, Agnes Whitfield sat in the dark that had now fully arrived and looked at the fountain she had donated 37 years ago in the name of a man who had walked here every morning because it helped him think, and she held a granola bar, peanut butter chocolate chip, in both hands, And she thought about a boy with a stopped watch on his wrist who had walked across a park to sit beside her when no one else had stopped. She thought about what he had said. "You do not have to sit alone." She thought about what she had seen in his face when he said it. Not the reflex of a child performing a good deed. Not the calculating look of someone expecting something in return. Just the direct and uncomplicated expression of a person who had seen something and responded to it, the way you respond to something when it has reached you in the place where you actually live. She looked at the watch on his wrist in her memory. Stopped at 2:14. 18 months. She thought about the particular combination of things required for an 11-year-old boy to recognize grief from 30 yards away in a public park on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in November and to walk across toward it rather than away from it. She thought about what that combination of things usually meant, what it said about the life that had produced it. She turned the granola bar over in her hands. After a while she stood from the bench, slowly, with the care her right knee required in the cold, and she put on her leather gloves and smoothed her coat and looked one more time at the fountain in the dark, at the still water and the settled leaves. She said something very quietly that was not meant for the park or the evening or anyone who might have been passing. Then she walked toward the west gate, which was the direction of where her driver would be waiting, and she did not look back. But she carried the granola bar with her. She carried it in her right hand, unopened, all the way to the car, and she was still holding it when she got in and the car moved into the evening traffic of the city, and her driver, a careful and attentive man named Gerald who had worked for her for 9 years and who had learned to read the particular qualities of her silences without commenting on them, did not ask about it. The city moved past the windows in its nighttime colors, yellow and blue and the long white streaks of passing headlights, and Agnes Whitfield looked out at it and thought about tomorrow, and whether she came to the park 2 days in a row or whether she did not, and what the honest answer was to that question. She thought she might already know. She was there on Wednesday. Eli came through the east gate at 3:49, 2 minutes later than Tuesday because James had stopped him at the school entrance to report something important about a documentary he had watched the night before involving bats, and James reporting something important involving any animal required a minimum of 7 minutes and could not be reasonably shortened. And Eli had stood at the school entrance in the cold listening because James was the kind of person who deserved to be listened to when he was excited about bats or anything else. He came through the gate and adjusted his backpack and looked toward the picnic table out of habit, and then his eyes moved, the way eyes move when something in a familiar landscape has changed, and there she was on the bench at the far end of the main path, in the same dark charcoal coat and the same leather gloves, sitting with the same careful upright posture as Tuesday, looking at the fountain. He stood at the gate for a moment. She had said she did not usually come 2 days in a row. He walked across the park toward the bench at the far end of the path. When he was close enough, she looked up, and there was in her expression something that was not quite amusement and not quite embarrassment but occupied the space between them, the expression of a person who has been caught doing something they admitted they would not do and who has decided to be at peace with that. "You came back," he said. "I did," she said. He sat down on the same end of the bench as before, the same foot and a half of space between them. He set his backpack in his lap. He looked at the fountain. "I thought you said you do not usually come 2 days in a row," he said. "I do not," she said. "Usually." He nodded, as though this settled something, and looked at the sky above the oak trees. It was a little clearer than Tuesday, the gray thinner, a pale wash of actual blue visible in the east. The pigeons had reassembled along the path in their usual configuration, working the area between the fountain and the east gate with the same earnest, distracted purpose they always had. Agnes had brought a small thermos. She unscrewed the top and poured something into the cap and held it toward him. He could see steam. "It is just tea," she said. "Earl Grey." "I do not know if you drink tea." "I drink tea," he said, though this was only recently true, since Diane had started keeping a box of it in the cabinet as a less expensive replacement for the coffee she had given up in September. He took the cap from Agnes and wrapped both hands around it. They sat in the warmth of it, not saying anything for a while. The tea was better than any tea Eli had drunk before, which was not a high bar, the standard having been set by the bags from a discount grocery store that tasted like something that had been near tea once under reasonable conditions. But this was different, full and real, with a floral quality underneath the dark that he did not have the vocabulary to name. "This is good," he said. "It is," she said. "Robert introduced me to it. He was particular about tea. He said it was the one civilized habit worth maintaining absolutely." She said it with a small private tone that meant the memory was a warm one, and Eli recognized the register because his own voice did something similar sometimes when he talked about his father, the way certain memories changed the temperature of the words around them. "My dad was particular about his coffee," Eli said. "He made it the same way every morning. He said the order you do things matters as much as what you do." Agnes looked at him. "What was his order?" "Water first, always fresh. Then the filter, then the grounds, then the water in the machine last. He said if you did it in the wrong order you were thinking about coffee the wrong way." Eli paused. "I don't actually know what the wrong way to think about coffee is. But I still do it in his order." Agnes was quiet for a moment. "That is the right thing to do," she said. "Do you know why?" "The right order for coffee?" "No," she said. "I mean it is right to do it his way." She looked at the fountain. "Continuing someone's particular habits after they are gone is one of the quietest and most sincere forms of love there is. I did not know your father, and I do not need to. Anyone who taught an 11-year-old to think about the order of things was paying attention to the important parts." Eli looked at the thermos cap in his hands. He thought about the morning after Marcus died, standing in front of the coffee maker in the kitchen with the box of coffee and the filter and the specific knowledge of what the right order was and doing it correctly, and then standing there waiting for the machine to start and understanding in the middle of that ordinary waiting that the person who had taught him the order was not going to be there when the coffee was ready. He had never told anyone that. He did not tell Agnes now. But something in the quality of her words had made the space for it to exist between them, which was the next best thing. They stayed until 4:45. When he left, she was still on the bench, looking at the fountain in the late November light. She was there on Friday. She was not there on Monday, which was the first weekday she had missed, and Eli noticed the absence in a way that surprised him by its specificity, the particular quality of the bench's emptiness that afternoon, how it was a different kind of empty than it had been before Agnes had first been sitting on it. He did his homework at the picnic table and finished the math worksheet he had abandoned the week before and read the first chapter of the history reading that was due Thursday, and when he walked past the bench on the way to the gate he slowed just slightly without meaning to. She was there on Tuesday. "You were not here Monday," he said, sitting down. "I had an appointment," she said. "That I could not move." He nodded. He did not ask what kind of appointment. He understood about appointments you could not move. By the third week of November, the pattern had established itself the way patterns establish themselves when two people have separately decided to continue something without discussing it directly. Eli arrived at the park. Agnes was there more often than not. If she was not there, he did his homework at the picnic table and left at 5 and came back the next day without comment. If she was there, he sat on the bench and they talked until the light went or until he needed to be home for Jade, whichever came first. The conversations went longer each time. He told her about Jefferson Middle and about James and the documentation of personal eating records and about Priya and the question of whether two books that were nothing alike could still be about the same thing, which Agnes said was not only a valid question but one that she had spent a significant portion of her adult life trying to answer in various forms. She asked him what books he was reading and listened to the answers the way adults who actually read books listen to other people talk about books, with the specific quality of attention that comes from genuine shared interest rather than performed patience. He told her about Jade. About the ketchup debate, about the Carnotaurus drawings her class had been doing for a biology unit, about the way Jade laughed so hard at dinner sometimes that she had to put her fork down and wait for herself to stop, and about how on the evenings when their mother was at the office cleaning job and it was just the two of them, Jade would sometimes ask him to tell her stories about when he and she were small, which required him to fabricate most of the content since Jade was only 7 and did not have robust early memories, and which he had gotten quite good at over the past year, the stories getting more elaborate with each telling. "She likes the ones about the rabbit," he said. "The rabbit in the stories is named Professor." He did not explain where the name had come from. It had simply arrived one evening in October and stayed. Agnes smiled at that, a real one, unguarded, the kind that arrived on her face before the composure had a chance to moderate it. It changed her face completely, opened it up, and Eli thought she must have been someone whose smile had always done that, made people feel they had been given something. "A rabbit named Professor," she said. "That is exactly right." He asked her about her daughter one afternoon, carefully. She had mentioned her once in the early days, had said she was gone and had said it in the particular way that meant a permanent kind of gone, and he had not asked about it again because he understood from his own experience that you did not push at those things when they had just been touched. But weeks had passed and the quality of silence between them had changed, and he asked now. She was quiet for a moment, the composure doing its work, and then she spoke. Her daughter's name had been Clara. She had died 14 years ago at the age of 42 from a stroke that came without warning in the middle of an ordinary morning. She had been a schoolteacher, middle school science, and she had been, by every account that Agnes had ever received from every person who had known her, precisely the teacher that every child deserved and that most children did not get, the kind who remembered not just the names but the particular things about each student, what they were struggling with and what they were almost ready for. "I used to watch her teach sometimes," Agnes said. She would visit Clara's classroom when she could. She said that the way her daughter spoke to 12-year-olds about the natural world, with the absolute conviction that it was astonishing and the certainty that they were capable of understanding why, was the most honest and important use of intelligence she had ever witnessed. She paused and looked at the fountain. "I have built many things," she said. "Clara built people. There is no comparison." Eli sat with that for a moment. He thought about his father at the kitchen table in the evenings, asking the specific questions that expected specific answers, making room in the conversation for whatever Eli had actually found in the day rather than the version that fit into a brief exchange. "He built people too," Eli said. "My dad. He was not a teacher but he did the same thing. He made you feel like what you noticed mattered." Agnes looked at him. "Yes," she said. "That is exactly it. That is the whole thing, in fact. Making someone feel that what they notice matters. That is the beginning of everything." They were quiet for a while in the way they had become accustomed to being quiet together, the specific non-absence of a shared silence between people who have found that they do not need noise to maintain the connection. She told him things about Robert in the weeks that followed. Not in a continuous way, not as a narrative he could follow from beginning to end, but in the accumulated way that important things are told between people who are discovering each other over time, a detail here and a quality there. She said Robert had been an engineer by training but a builder by temperament, that he had cared less about the plans on paper than about the actual thing being built and whether the people who would use it had been thought. 11-year-old to think about the order of things was paying attention to the important parts. Eli looked at the thermos cap in his hands. He thought about the morning after Marcus died, standing in front of the coffee maker in the kitchen with the box of coffee and the filter and the specific knowledge of what the right order was and doing it correctly, and then standing there waiting for the machine to start and understanding in the middle of that ordinary waiting that the person who had taught him the order was not going to be there when the coffee was ready. He had never told anyone that. He did not tell Agnes now. But something in the quality of her words had made the space for it to exist between them, which was the next best thing. They stayed until 4:45. When he left, she was still on the bench, looking at the fountain in the late November light. She was there on Friday. She was not there on Monday, which was the first weekday she had missed, and Eli noticed the absence in a way that surprised him by its specificity, the particular quality of the bench's emptiness that afternoon, how it was a different kind of empty than it had been before Agnes had first been sitting on it. He did his homework at the picnic table and finished the math worksheet he had abandoned the week before and read the first chapter of the history reading that was due Thursday, and when he walked past the bench on the way to the gate he slowed just slightly without meaning to. She was there on Tuesday. You were not here Monday, he said, sitting down. I had an appointment, she said. That I could not move. He nodded. He did not ask what kind of appointment. He understood about appointments you could not move. By the third week of November, the pattern had established itself the way patterns establish themselves when two people have separately decided to continue something without discussing it directly. Eli arrived at the park. Agnes was there more often than not. If she was not there, he did his homework at the picnic table and left at 5 and came back the next day without comment. If she was there, he sat on the bench and they talked until the light went or until he needed to be home for Jade, whichever came first. The conversations went longer each time. He told her about Jefferson Middle and about James and the documentation of personal eating records and about Priya and the question of whether two books that were nothing alike could still be about the same thing, which Agnes said was not only a valid question but one that she had spent a significant portion of her adult life trying to answer in various forms. She asked him what books he was reading and listened to the answers the way adults who actually read books listen to other people talk about books, with the specific quality of attention that comes from genuine shared interest rather than performed patience. He told her about Jade. About the ketchup debate, about the Carnotaurus drawings her class had been doing for a biology unit, about the way Jade laughed so hard at dinner sometimes that she had to put her fork down and wait for herself to stop, and about how on the evenings when their mother was at the office cleaning job and it was just the two of them, Jade would sometimes ask him to tell her stories about when he and she were small, which required him to fabricate most of the content since Jade was only 7 and did not have robust early memories, and which he had gotten quite good at over the past year, the stories getting more elaborate with each telling. She likes the ones about the rabbit, he said. The rabbit in the stories is named Professor. He did not explain where the name had come from. It had simply arrived one evening in October and stayed. Agnes smiled at that, a real one, unguarded, the kind that arrived on her face before the composure had a chance to moderate it. It changed her face completely, opened it up, and Eli thought she must have been someone whose smile had always done that, made people feel they had been given something. A rabbit named Professor, she said. That is exactly right. He asked her about her daughter one afternoon, carefully. She had mentioned her once in the early days, had said she was gone and had said it in the particular way that meant a permanent kind of gone, and he had not asked about it again because he understood from his own experience that you did not push at those things when they had just been touched. But weeks had passed and the quality of silence between them had changed and he asked now. She was quiet for a moment, the composure doing its work, and then she spoke. Her daughter's name had been Clara. She had died 14 years ago at the age of 42 from a stroke that came without warning in the middle of an ordinary morning. She had been a schoolteacher, middle school science, and she had been, by every account that Agnes had ever received from every person who had known her, precisely the teacher that every child deserved and that most children did not get, the kind who remembered not just the names but the particular things about each student, what they were struggling with and what they were almost ready for. I used to watch her teach sometimes, Agnes said. She would visit Clara's classroom when she could. She said that the way her daughter spoke to 12-year-olds about the natural world, with the absolute conviction that it was astonishing and the certainty that they were capable of understanding why, was the most honest and important use of intelligence she had ever witnessed. She paused and looked at the fountain. I have built many things, she said. Clara built people. There is no comparison. Eli sat with that for a moment. He thought about his father at the kitchen table in the evenings, asking the specific questions that expected specific answers, making room in the conversation for whatever Eli had actually found in the day rather than the version that fit into a brief exchange. He built people too, Eli said. My dad. He was not a teacher but he did the same thing. He made you feel like what you noticed mattered. Agnes looked at him. Yes, she said. That is exactly it. That is the whole thing, in fact. Making someone feel that what they notice matters. That is the beginning of everything. They were quiet for a while in the way they had become accustomed to being quiet together, the specific non-absence of a shared silence between people who have found that they do not need noise to maintain the connection. She told him things about Robert in the weeks that followed. Not in a continuous way, not as a narrative he could follow from beginning to end, but in the accumulated way that important things are told between people who are discovering each other over time, a detail here and a quality there. She said Robert had been an engineer by training but a builder by temperament, that he had cared less about the plans on paper than about the actual thing being built and whether the people who would use it had been thought of. She said he had a habit of visiting the places his company built after they were finished, not to admire them, but to sit in them and understand whether the thing on paper had become something real and useful in the world. She said he had believed in this specific neighborhood, the one they were sitting in now, long before it had become worth believing in, at a time when most people with resources to invest were investing them elsewhere. He thought it was important, she said. That places like this one exist. Places that belong to everyone. Eli looked at the stone fountain and the plaque he walked past every day. He had read it enough times to have it in memory of Robert Whitfield, who believed in this community. He thought about the name. He thought about what Agnes had just said about Robert believing in this neighborhood. He looked at the plaque. He looked at Agnes. He did not make the connection. He was 11 years old and he had walked past that plaque every school day for 18 months with his mind on other things, and the name Whitfield was not a name that meant anything specific to him in the way it would have meant something to an adult who read business news. So the connection did not arrive. He filed the name somewhere without knowing he was filing it and looked back at the fountain. It was on a Thursday in the third week of November that Jade came to the park. It had not been planned. Eli's school had a half-day, a parent-teacher conference afternoon that released the students at noon, and Jade's school had a corresponding early release, and Diane had arranged for a neighbor named Mrs. Okafor to pick Jade up and keep her until Eli could come get her at 2. The half-day meant Eli arrived at the park a full hour and a half earlier than usual, and when he came through the east gate at 1:53 with Jade's small hand in his, Agnes was already on the bench. Agnes looked up. Her eyes went to the small girl at Eli's side and something in her face shifted in the way faces shift when something unexpected happens, and the shift is in the direction of warmth rather than away from it. Jade looked at the woman on the bench with the enormous-eyed directness she brought to all new situations. She had her backpack on both shoulders and was wearing the puffy pink coat that Diane had bought for her at the end of last winter in the wrong size because it had been deeply discounted and would fit by fall, and which had indeed fit by fall, and which Jade called her cloud coat. Her braids were freshly done with purple ties at the ends. "This is my sister Jade," Eli said. "Jade, this is Agnes." "Hi Agnes," Jade said with the comfortable directness of a child who has never understood why you would be anything other than direct with a new person. "Are you Eli's friend?" Agnes looked at the question with the same seriousness Jade had brought to it. "I believe I am," she said. "Good," Jade said. "He needs more friends." She sat down on the bench between them with the completeness of someone who has determined this is the correct arrangement and sees no need to ask whether it is acceptable, and she began to work on the buckle of her backpack with the focused energy of someone who has something important inside it. Eli sat on his end of the bench. He caught Agnes's eye over Jade's head. Agnes's expression said something that required no translation and that he understood completely, the specific expression of an adult encountering a child of profound self-possession for the first time. "I have a drawing," Jade announced, extracting a folded piece of paper from her backpack and unfolding it with the gravity appropriate to presenting important documentation. She held it up between her and Agnes. "This is Professor the Rabbit. He is a famous rabbit." Agnes studied the drawing with the full and serious attention it had been offered. Professor was rendered in purple crayon with what appeared to be a graduation cap on his head, which Jade had drawn as a flat square with a string coming off one corner. His expression was what Eli could only describe as distinguished. "He is very distinguished," Agnes said. Jade looked at her with sudden respect. "I told Eli that. He said Professor was more friendly looking." She pronounced this with the tone of someone who has had this conversation before and found their opponent's position to be without merit. I think Agnes is right, Eli said. I know I am, Jade said, refiling the drawing in her backpack with the satisfied efficiency of someone whose position has been confirmed by a neutral party. She looked at Agnes. Do you have a rabbit? I do not, Agnes said. I have never had a rabbit. Jade considered the implications of this. You could get one, she said helpfully. They are not as difficult as people think. You just have to understand them. Is that so? Professor does not like loud noises, Jade said. And he does not like being held unless he decided that it is his idea. She paused. Those are the main rules. Agnes nodded. Those seem like reasonable rules. Eli watched this exchange with the feeling of someone watching something he had not anticipated, and that was making him quietly happy in a way he could not have articulated precisely. Jade had taken to Agnes with the complete and uncalculating openness that she brought to anyone she had decided was worth talking to, and Agnes was receiving it with a naturalness that had no performance in it, the way of someone who genuinely liked being spoken to directly by small people with opinions. Jade asked Agnes 7 questions in the following 40 minutes. She asked what Agnes's favorite color was, which Agnes said was the specific blue of late afternoon sky in November, indicating upward with one finger, which Jade accepted as a legitimate answer. She asked whether Agnes liked soup, which Agnes said she did, specifically lentil soup, which Jade said was a good answer because lentil soup was the most serious kind of soup. She asked whether Agnes could do a cartwheel, which Agnes said she could not currently, and Jade said that was fine because neither could Eli. She asked whether Agnes knew any good stories, and Agnes told one, a short and quiet story about a fox who decided one winter to learn the habits of every creature in the forest and by the end of the winter could predict the weather better than any of them, which Jade listened to with her full and complete attention and which she declared afterward to be a very good story with a good ending. At 4:15 Eli stood. We have to go start dinner, he said. Okay, Jade said, standing immediately with the compliance of someone who has had a satisfying afternoon and is willing to close it out on good terms. She looked at Agnes. Goodbye, Agnes. Goodbye, Jade. Agnes said. Thank you for introducing me to Professor. He wanted to meet you, Jade said simply, and this was apparently the whole explanation needed, and she took Eli's hand and they started across the park toward the east gate. About halfway across, Jade looked up at her brother. I like her, she said. She is good, Eli agreed. She listens the right way, Jade said. And she told the fox story right. She did not try to make it too happy at the end. No, Eli said. She did not. He looked back once toward the bench. Agnes was watching them go. When she saw him look back, she raised one hand, a small and unhurried wave. He raised his in return and turned back toward the gate. If you are watching this story right now and you are feeling something in it, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Your support means the world, and it is how these stories find the people who need them most. December arrived in the city with a sharpness that had not been present in November, the cold becoming specific and intentional rather than the gradual suggestion it had been before. The oak trees in the park stood in the kind of bare winter clarity that makes everything look both smaller and more defined. Eli added a second pair of socks to his routine and found a pair of his father's old gloves in the back of the closet, which were too large for his hands but which he wore anyway with the cuffs folded over twice, and which were very warm. He had been noticing things about Agnes over the weeks that accumulated into a picture he had not been deliberately constructing but which was forming anyway in the way that pictures form when you are paying close attention to someone over time. He noticed that she was never without the thermos, and that the thermos itself was different from the kind of thermos people bought at pharmacies or the outdoor section of general stores, heavier and with a particular precision to the way the top threaded. He noticed that her coat, which he had been assuming was simply a good coat, was the kind of good that was different from the kind of good that other good coats were, in the way that certain things carry quality in their construction rather than in their appearance. He noticed that she wore a ring on her right hand, not her left, a wide gold band with a dark stone that caught the winter light in a way that plain gold did not, and that she touched it sometimes without seeming to know she was doing it, the way people touch things that mark something important. He noticed that her phone rang sometimes when they were in the park, and that she always looked at the screen before she answered, and that she did not always answer. When she did, she kept it brief and low, and once, on a Friday afternoon in the first week of December, he heard whoever was on the other end say something and Agnes say, in a voice that was entirely different from the voice she used in the park, not warmer or colder but more formal, more deliberate, as though she were speaking in a different register altogether, "Yes, I will review it tonight. Schedule the call for Thursday morning." He heard, before the call ended, the name the person on the other end used when they addressed her. Ms. Whitfield. He sat with the name for a moment, the way you sit with something that has a familiar shape but whose significance you cannot yet place. He had heard the name before. He was sure of it. But the park was not a place where he usually sorted out such connections, and the afternoon was getting cold, and a pigeon had decided to stand on the very end of the bench and regard them both with unreasonable confidence, and the moment passed without the connection being made. Agnes said, when the call ended, "I am sorry about that." "It is fine," Eli said. "It was a colleague," she said, which was not quite a lie and not quite a complete description. He nodded and did not push, and they went back to the conversation they had been having about the fox story and whether it would have ended differently if the fox had chosen to study only one creature instead of all of them. The black car appeared for the first time on a Thursday. Eli had not seen it at first because he had been focused on the conversation with Agnes and on a problem that had been with him since the morning, which was that Jade's school shoes had developed a split along the left sole that made a wet December sidewalk a problem, and he had been turning over the question of whether to tell Diane or to handle it some other way, and turning it over had occupied the background of his attention all day. He only noticed the car when he stood to leave, looking toward the west gate out of habit, and saw it parked on the street just beyond the gate, a dark car with a quality about it that was different from the parked cars that normally lined that side of the park. Dark and very clean and with a stillness to it that suggested it was parked in the particular way that cars are parked when someone is waiting in them rather than the way they are parked when someone has left them and gone somewhere. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Agnes. She was looking at the fountain. He walked home and thought about the car for approximately 4 minutes on the way and then thought about Jade's shoe and then thought about the history reading that was due the next day and the car moved to the back of everything else. It was on a Monday in the second week of December that he came to the park looking different than usual. Agnes knew it immediately. She had become, over the past month, very fluent in the specific vocabulary of how Eli Carter arrived at the bench on any given afternoon, the posture of his backpack on his shoulders and the angle of his head and the particular quality of his walk across the park from the east gate, which on a good day was purposeful and on a difficult day carried the specific compression of someone managing something they have not finished managing. Today the compression was there in a way she had not seen before. He sat down on the bench and set his backpack in his lap and was quiet for a long moment before he looked at the fountain. "You are troubled," she said. He glanced at her. "Is it that obvious?" "To me," she said. "Yes." He was quiet again. She waited. "We got a letter," he said finally. "A letter from a company." He paused. "They bought the building we live in. Our apartment building." He looked at his hands. "The letter says we have 90 days. The whole building. All the tenants." Agnes was very still. 90 days to do what, she said, though something in her had already understood. "To find somewhere else," he said. "They are going to develop the property." He said the word develop in the way people say words that have been applied to their situation without their consent, with the flatness of someone encountering a language that does not account for them. "My mom got the letter on Saturday. She thought she had hidden it, but I found it yesterday when I was looking for a power bill she needed for something." He paused. "I read it." He looked at the fountain. "She does not know I know." Agnes said nothing. She looked at the fountain. "The building has 14 apartments," Eli said. "There is Mr. and Mrs. Okafor on the second floor, She is the one who picks up Jade sometimes. There is Mrs. Barrett on the third floor who is 71 and has lived there for 22 years. There is Mr. Dominguez on the fourth floor who has 3 kids in elementary school. He paused. Our apartment is 4B. We have been there since I was 3. She heard what he was not saying, which was that this was the apartment his father had carried him into at 3 years old and that his father had lived in and died having lived in, that this was the place where the photograph on the refrigerator hung and where the oven leaned slightly to the right and where Jade had learned to walk across that specific kitchen floor and where the fourth floor window caught the early eastern light on clear mornings, and that this was in every sense that mattered the place where his family's life had the shape it had. What company is it? She asked. He reached into his jacket pocket. He had a folded piece of paper, a copy he had made of the letter before putting it back where he found it. He unfolded it and looked at it. Whitfield Development Group, he said. A subsidiary of Whitfield Industries. The air in the park did not change. The pigeons continued their circuits. The December light came through the oak trees at its low winter angle and made long shadows on the path. None of this changed. But something changed in Agnes. It was not visible in any single feature of her face or her posture. It was something that happened below the surface, a shift in the quality of her stillness that was different from the usual stillness, less the stillness of a person who is choosing to be quiet and more the stillness of a person who has received information that requires a moment of internal reckoning before anything else can happen. She looked at the paper in his hand. She did not reach for it. She looked at it with an expression that he could not read, which was unusual because he had become quite good over the past month at reading her expressions. This one was contained in a way he had not seen before, contained with a specific purpose, the way you contain something when you need time to understand what it is before you let it be visible. Do you know the company? Eli asked. She was quiet for a moment that was precisely 1 moment longer than the pause before a straightforward no. I know the name, she said. He looked at her. He waited. She looked at the fountain. She folded her hands in her lap over the leather gloves with the careful precision of someone making a decision about how to proceed, and she said, in the measured voice of someone choosing each word with intention, "Give me a few days, Eli. I would like to think about some things." He did not know what this meant. He did not ask. He understood from the quality of her words, the specific gravity of them, that she was not dismissing the subject but was doing something more serious than dismissing it, that she was receiving it and carrying it somewhere with her. He refolded the paper and put it back in his pocket. Okay, he said. They sat for another 20 minutes. They did not talk about the letter again. Agnes asked him about the history reading and he told her about it, and she told him something related to it from her own experience that was more interesting than the textbook version, and the conversation moved in the way their conversations moved, naturally, with the ease of 2 people who have found each other's company to be genuinely useful. But underneath it, he could feel that she was somewhere else in a portion of her attention, the specific divided quality of a person who is managing a conversation while also managing something internal that the conversation cannot address. He recognized it because he had felt it himself in the weeks after October, the particular experience of being present in the world while also being partially located inside something that was happening at a depth the world could not fully access. When he left that afternoon, he walked to the gate and stopped and looked back once. Agnes was still on the bench. She was not looking at the fountain. She was looking at her hands folded in her lap, and she was very still, and he thought for a moment she looked the way she had looked on the first Tuesday, the holding herself together quality, though now it was shaped differently, less like grief and more like the quality of someone working through something that they had not expected to be asked to work through today. He went home. He made pasta and a salad for dinner and helped Jade with her spelling words and did not say anything about the letter to either of them. In the apartment on the 3rd floor of 318, Birch Avenue, Mrs. Barrett, who was 71 years old and had lived there for 22 years, had told Eli's mother 2 days before that she had nowhere in the city she could go on the rent she could afford, Because the rents in Millbrook City had been climbing for 3 years in a way that what she had been paying at Birch Avenue was no longer possible to find within a reasonable distance of her doctor and her church and the community center, where she had been attending the senior programs for 11 years. Eli did not know this specifically. He knew it in the general way of someone who has heard the adult conversations that happen in the kitchen when adults believe children are not listening, which children almost always are. Agnes sat on the bench in Alderman Park until the dark had fully arrived. She was not thinking about the fountain or the park or the cold or the low December light through the oak trees. She was thinking about a name at the top of a letter in a boy's jacket pocket. A name she knew not as words on a document but as something that had been part of her life for 40 years, a thing she had built and named and given to the world with the intention that it should be used for a specific purpose, which was not the purpose it was apparently being used for now. She was thinking about her son. Thomas Whitfield was 51 years old and had been running Whitfield Industries for 3 years, since Agnes had stepped back from daily operations at 69 with the agreement, explicit and documented, that the company's direction and its values would be preserved. She had built it on a specific set of principles, among them the principle that the communities in which the company operated were not simply locations with development potential but places where people actually lived, and that the company's obligation to those people was not merely legal but moral. She had held to this through 4 recessions and 2 market corrections and the particular pressure of shareholders who wanted the margins that came with treating real estate as pure asset rather than as someone's home. Thomas had not disagreed with these principles at the time she handed him the company. He had said the right things. He had signed the right documents. He had sat across from her at the conference table in the office they had shared for 10 years and told her that the company's values were his values and that she had built something worth continuing. That had been 3 years ago. In the 18 months since, she had heard things through the network of people who had been loyal to her and who continued to tell her what they believed she needed to know, things about projects that did not fit the profile she had established, about acquisitions in neighborhoods that the company had previously avoided on principle, about a direction that was beginning to look less like a continuation and more like a dismantling conducted in slow increments. She had called Thomas about it twice. Both calls had been managed with the specific technique of managed calls, which was to be entirely reasonable on the surface while making nothing actually available for engagement. He had said the market had changed. He had said the old model was not sustainable. He had said she needed to trust the people she had handed the company to. She had not called again. That had been 6 months ago, and she had been sitting with the weight of it in the way you sit with things you are not sure how to address when the person you need to address them with is your own child and you have already tried twice and been turned away. She sat on the bench in Alderman Park in the dark of a December Monday and turned the problem over with the methodical thoroughness of a woman who had spent 40 years making decisions that other people told her were too complicated to be made and had made them anyway. Birch Avenue. 14 apartments. Mr. and Mrs. Okafor. Mrs. Barrett, 71 years old, 22 years. Mr. Dominguez and his 3 children. A family in 4B, a woman working 2 jobs and a boy with a stopwatch who made coffee in the right order and walked across a park to sit beside a crying old woman he had never met because he had learned to look for the thing that needed to be seen. She sat with it until the cold had made itself clearly known through the wool coat and the December air had the particular bite of a temperature that does not negotiate. Then she took her phone from her coat pocket. She looked at it for a moment. She thought about the last 2 calls. She thought about the way Thomas had managed them. She thought about what it meant to have built something over 40 years for a specific purpose and to watch it being redirected without her consent while she sat in parks and drank tea from a thermos and told fox stories to a 7-year-old who had never heard them. She dialed. The phone rang 3 times. Then his voice, not the voice she remembered from his childhood, not even the voice he had used in the early years at the company when he had still been learning from her and the learning had kept a certain quality of openness in him, but the voice he used now, the efficient, managed voice of someone for whom most incoming calls are variables to be processed. Thomas, she said. Her voice was entirely clear, entirely level, entirely itself. I need you to tell me about the Birch Avenue acquisition. A silence on the line. Not the silence of surprise, the silence of recognition, of someone understanding that the conversation they had been expecting to eventually have had arrived sooner than anticipated. He began to speak. Agnes listened. She listened with the full and complete attention she had been giving to park benches and fox stories and the specific ways that 11-year-old boys talk about their fathers, with none of the managed composure of someone processing a business call, but with the direct and open reception of someone who has decided that what they are about to hear is going to require them to feel all of it. The city lights reflected on the still water in the fountain basin. Somewhere in the park, a last pigeon settled for the evening into a tree. The bench was very cold now and she did not move from it. She listened. And when Thomas had finished what he intended to say, and paused in the way of someone who believes the explanation has been provided and the subject can now be closed, Agnes said, in the voice of a woman who had built something from nothing because she understood what things were actually for and had never once confused the map for the territory, "Thomas, I am coming to the office tomorrow morning. I will be in at 8, she said. We are going to discuss this properly. Not on the phone. In the building. In the office with my name on the door that I gave to you in trust." Another silence. "All right," he said. His voice had changed slightly. She recognized the change. She had heard it years ago when he was young and had done something he knew he should not have done, the particular quality of a person who has been found out and is calculating what comes next. "Tomorrow morning," she said. 8 o'clock. She ended the call. She sat on the bench in the dark for another 5 minutes, the phone in her lap, the leather gloves beside it, the thermos cap empty beside them. Then she stood, slowly, with the care her right knee required in the cold, and she straightened her coat, and she looked at the fountain one final time, at the stone and the still water and the plaque she did not need to read to know by heart. She walked toward the west gate. Gerald's car was there, dark and patient, the way it always was. She got in. "Tomorrow," she said. Gerald did not ask for more. He had worked for her for 9 years and understood the specific weight of that particular word, said in that particular way, by this particular woman, which was the weight of someone who has been patient about something for a long time and has decided that the patience is over. The car pulled into the traffic of the city, and the park disappeared behind them, and the street lamps ran by in the dark, and Agnes Whitfield sat in the back seat with her hands in her lap and thought about the morning ahead and about what she had built and what it was for and about a boy who had come through a gate on a gray November afternoon and sat down beside her when no one else had stopped. She thought about what it meant that of all the people who had walked past that bench, it had been this one who had come. She thought about the building on Birch Avenue and the 14 families in it, and about an 11-year-old boy who made coffee in the right order and wore a stopped watch and carried something much heavier than his backpack across a park every afternoon, and who had looked at an old woman crying alone and had not looked away. Real kindness, she thought, rarely arrives with explanation. It arrives without warning, in the form of a person doing something ordinary that turns out to be the least ordinary thing in the world. She thought about what she owed it. She thought she already knew. The Whitfield Industries building stood 12 stories above the financial district, a building Agnes had commissioned at 53 years old when she was still the kind of person who paid attention to where the windows faced and how the light would move through the lobby at 7 in the morning when the people who worked there arrived. She had cared about those things, about what a building said to the people inside it before they had done anything yet that day. She had not thought about it in a while. She thought about it now, stepping through the lobby at 7:51, 9 minutes ahead of the time she had given Thomas, because she had always believed that arriving first told the room something important about who intended to be taken seriously. The receptionist, a young woman named Priya who had been in the building for 2 years and who Agnes had met twice at company events, looked up and went slightly wide-eyed in the specific way of someone encountering something they had been told was a possibility but had not entirely believed was a real one. "Good morning," Agnes said. She did not stop at the desk. She took the elevator to the 9th floor and walked the corridor to the office with her name still on the door, because Thomas had kept it there, which she had decided meant something, though she was no longer sure what. She went in and sat not behind the desk but in one of the chairs at the side table where she had always held the conversations that were about thinking rather than authority, and she set her leather gloves on the table beside her and waited. Thomas came in at 8:03. He was a tall man with his father's bone structure and his own particular quality of controlled composure, the composure of someone who had learned it rather than grown into it, which had always been the difference between them. He looked at her in the chair by the side table and understood what the choice of chair meant. He sat across from her. They spoke for 1 hour and 22 minutes. Agnes had done this kind of conversation before, the kind where you arrive already knowing what happened and the purpose is not to discover but to name, clearly and without softness, what the naming requires. She laid out what she knew about the Birch Avenue acquisition and 4 others like it in the past 18 months, the pattern of them, the communities they occupied, the families they displaced, the gap between what the company had been built to be and what those projects represented. Thomas defended and explained and deflected in the carefully managed way she had anticipated, and she listened to all of it without interrupting, because listening without interrupting was a form of respect that she had always believed was owed even in difficult conversations, and because she needed to hear everything he had to say before she said what she had come to say. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, plainly and without heat, that she was resuming an active advisory role in the company's acquisition decisions, effective immediately, and that this was not a request but an exercise of the retained authority she had documented precisely because she had understood that the day might come when she would need it. She said that the Birch Avenue acquisition would be reversed. Not restructured, not repurposed, reversed. She said that the 4 other acquisitions like it would be reviewed and that each one would be handled individually on its merits, but that the standard used to evaluate them would be the company's founding standard and not any revision of it that had been introduced in her absence. Thomas said several things in response to this. Some of them were reasonable and some of them were not. Agnes answered the reasonable ones with specificity and let the others sit in the room unaddressed, which was generally the right thing to do with arguments that did not deserve the dignity of refutation. At the end of it, she looked at her son across the table with the expression of a woman who had loved a person for 51 years and who understood the full distance between what he was and what he could be, and she said, "Thomas, I did not build this company to make you rich. I built it because I believed that people with resources could choose to use them in ways that left things better than they found them." She paused. "That is still what I believe. And that is still what this company is going to do. You can help me with that or you can leave. But it cannot be done around you. I am too old and too tired for working around." Thomas was quiet for a long time. Something moved through his face. She watched it move and did not look away. "All right," he said. His voice was different than it had been at the beginning of the conversation. Quieter, and underneath the quiet, something that was not quite the thing she was hoping for but was in the direction of it. "All right," he said again. "Tell me what you need from me." She picked up her gloves from the table. She told him. She came to the park on Thursday. Eli arrived at 3:48 and she was already on the bench, which was usual, but something about the way she was sitting was different from usual. She was not looking at the fountain. She was looking at the east gate, and when he came through it she was already watching him cross the park, which she did not normally do. Normally she watched the fountain and looked up when he got close. Today she watched him the whole way across. He sat down on his end of the bench. He looked at her. "There is something you want to tell me," he said. "Yes," she said. She was quiet for a moment. Not managing the silence, not composing herself, simply sitting with it the way she sat with things she had decided were important enough to be approached carefully. "Eli," she said. "I owe you some honesty about who I am." He waited. "My full name is Agnes Whitfield," she said. "The company in the letter you showed me, Whitfield Development Group, is a subsidiary of Whitfield Industries. I founded that company 40 years ago. For the past 3 years it has been run by my son, Thomas." She paused. Thomas made the decision to acquire the building on Birch Avenue, along with several others like it, in a direction that was not consistent with what I built the company to do, and without my knowledge. She looked at him directly. I went to the office on Tuesday morning, she said. Thomas and I have spoken at length. The Birch Avenue acquisition is being reversed. The building is not going to be developed. The families in it are not going to be displaced. Eli was very still. The park continued around them, the pigeons, the low winter light, the bare oak trees. The city moved past the walls beyond the east and west gates in its ordinary afternoon business. None of it changed. He looked at the fountain. He looked at the plaque on the fountain base. In memory of Robert Whitfield, who believed in this community. He had walked past that plaque every school day for 18 months. He had read it enough times to have the words in memory. He looked at it now and the words arranged themselves differently than they ever had before, the name in them suddenly connected to something, the name she had just said, Whitfield, and the name the person on the phone had used, Ms. Whitfield, and the ring on her right hand and the black car at the west gate and the thermos and the coat and a phone call taken in a quiet voice by a woman who had said I know the name in the one moment longer than a straightforward no. He looked at the plaque for a long time. Then he looked at Agnes. My husband Robert, she said quietly. He donated this park to the city 37 years ago. We used to walk here together in the mornings when we lived in this neighborhood. He said it helped him think. Eli looked at the plaque again. He looked at his hands and his father's two large gloves. He thought about the name he had walked past 5 days a week for 18 months without knowing what it meant, the way you can be surrounded by something important without seeing it until the moment when you suddenly do and the not seeing becomes its own astonishment. He thought about sitting down on this bench on a gray November Tuesday because a woman was crying and no one else had stopped. He thought about the granola bar he had held out without ceremony. You don't have to be hungry. Sometimes you just should have something anyway. He pressed his lips together. He was 11 years old and he was very good at managing things, but he was also 11 years old, and something about the size of what he was holding was making it difficult to manage the way he usually managed things, and he could feel it in his face before he could address it. He's been walking past his name, Eli said. His voice was not entirely steady. Yes, Agnes said. Without knowing. He looked at the plaque one more time. Then he looked down at his father's watch on his wrist, the cracked crystal and the stopped hands and the 2:14 that had not moved in 18 months. He thought about Robert Whitfield walking in this park in the mornings because it helped him think, and about Agnes coming here every year on the day that mattered and sitting on this bench alone for 11 years, and about a gray Tuesday when she had been sitting there and he had come through the east gate at 3:47 with his chin down against the wind and his backpack on both shoulders. He thought about what would have happened if he had not looked up. Agnes watched him think. She did not fill the silence. She had known him long enough to know that this was not silence that needed to be filled. After a while he looked at her. Why didn't you tell me who you were, he said. Before. Because it would have changed things, she said. The way you sat with me. The way you spoke. It would have changed it and it should not have been changed. She looked at him steadily. What you gave me on that Tuesday afternoon and in all the Tuesdays after it, you gave as yourself. Not as someone talking to a wealthy woman. As a person talking to another person. She paused. That is a rarer thing than you know. He was quiet for a moment. You were going to tell me eventually, he said. It was not a question. Yes, she said. I was going to tell you. She looked at the fountain. I did not know it would be because of the letter in your jacket pocket. He nodded. He thought about all of it, the thermos and the coat and the car and Ms. Whitfield on the phone and the way she had said I know the name with that one extra moment of silence, and the way she had said give me a few days with the weight of someone who already understood something she had not yet said. He thought about the bench and the empty hands and the not knowing and the grief and the granola bar and the fox story told to Jade exactly right, not too happy at the end. Did it help, he asked. Sitting here. When I came. He said it carefully, the way he asked things when he was not entirely sure he had the right to ask them. Agnes looked at the fountain for a long moment. My daughter used to say, she said, that the most important thing one person can do for another is to be genuinely present with them. Not helpful. Not useful. Present. She paused. Clara was right about most things. This she was especially right about. She looked at him. You were present with me, Eli. On a day when I had been sitting in this park for an hour and 23 people had walked past this bench without looking twice. She paused. You looked. You walked across the park and you sat down and you were present. She said the last word with the specific weight of someone using it to mean something precise. Yes. It helped. He nodded. He turned the stopped watch on his wrist, the habit he had when he was processing something he had not finished processing, around once and back. What happens to the building now, he said. Agnes explained it then, in the specific and detailed way she had always believed things of consequence should be explained to people whose lives they touched, because vague reassurances were a form of disrespect and she had never been able to offer them. The Birch Avenue building had been transferred into a community land trust, a permanent arrangement that removed it from the speculative market and guaranteed its affordability for the people currently living in it and for the people who would live in it in the future. The trust was funded by the Whitfield Foundation and administered by a board that included tenant representatives, which meant the people whose home it was would have a voice in how it was kept. The 14 families in the building had been notified by letter that morning. Mrs. Barrett, 71 years old, 22 years in apartment 3A, had been personally called by a member of Agnes's staff to make sure she understood what it meant and that it was real. Eli was quiet while she explained all of this, listening with the specific attention he gave to things that mattered, and when she finished he was quiet for a moment more. Mrs. Barrett called my mom this morning, he said. My mom didn't say anything at dinner but she looked different. Her face. He paused. I didn't know what had happened. I just knew something had. She needed to understand it herself before she could tell you, Agnes said. Yeah, he said. That is how she is. He looked at the fountain. She is going to want to know how it happened. Agnes nodded. That is her right. If she would like to meet me, I would like to meet her. He glanced at her. She is not easy to talk to about things like this, he said. She doesn't want anyone to feel sorry for her. I don't feel sorry for her, Agnes said. I feel considerable respect for her. There is a significant difference. He sat with that for a moment and then gave a small nod, the nod he gave when something had been said that settled an open question. There is something else, Agnes said. He looked at her. The Whitfield Foundation has a scholarship program, she said. It has been running for 12 years. It funds college education for first-generation students, students whose parents did not attend college. She paused. I have asked our director to reach out to your mother about it. Not to give Eli something he has not earned but to make sure the path is clear for when he gets there. She looked at him. You are 11. The scholarship is for college. That is 7 years from now. But the path should be clear now so that when you arrive at it you do not have to discover the road has been blocked by things that have nothing to do with what you are capable of. He looked at his hands. And for Jade, Agnes said quietly, the same. He pressed his lips together again. He was better at managing it now than he had been 5 minutes ago, but it was still close. You do not have to do this, he said. His voice was low and steady. I know I do not, Agnes said. She said it simply, with no particular emphasis, because the simplicity was the point. I know. They sat on the bench in the December afternoon with the fountain still and the oak trees bare and the low winter light coming through at its long oblique angle and making the stone of the path glow faintly in the way that stones in winter sometimes do, as though they contained something that the season has not managed to take out of them. After a while Eli said, I walk past that plaque every day. He looked at it again. In memory of Robert Whitfield, who believed in this community. He sat with the words in a new way. He believed in this neighborhood, he said. Before it was worth believing in. Yes, Agnes said. long before. That is what you meant, Eli said. When you told me about him. That he visited the things he built to see if they had become real. Yes. Eli looked at the plaque for a long time. Then he looked at Agnes. I think he would have liked knowing a kid sat here with you today, he said. Agnes's composure did what it rarely did. It gave way, just slightly, at the edges, in the area around her eyes, in the quality of her breath. I think so too, she said. She said it barely above a whisper, and then she looked at the fountain and assembled herself back, and Eli looked at the fountain too and gave her the moment she needed to do it, because he understood that some things you give people time for without making them aware you are giving it. Diane Carter met Agnes Whitfield on a Saturday in late December, in the park, on the bench, at an hour when the weekend had cleared the path of school children and joggers and left it to the people who came without purpose except to be somewhere that was not inside. Eli had told his mother, carefully, in the specific way he did things that required care, which was to begin at the beginning and proceed without skipping, including the part about the crying and the granola bar and the weeks of tea and Fox stories and the name on the letter and the plaque on the fountain. He told it all at the kitchen table on the evening after the Thursday in the park, while Jade was asleep and the apartment was quiet, and Diane listened without interrupting in the way that she listened when she understood that interrupting would cost something. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, in the voice she used when something had moved her in a place she was still deciding whether to let be visible, you walked across that park and sat down beside her. Yes. When everyone else walked past. Yes. Because she was alone and you knew what that felt like. He looked at the table. I just did not want her to have to sit alone. Diane looked at her son for a moment with the expression that she occasionally let him see, the one that was not the managed competence of a woman holding things together but the one underneath it, the real one, the one that said she was aware of what she had in this child and that the awareness was sometimes too large to be entirely contained. She did not say anything. She put her hand on his for a moment. Then she said, I would like to meet her. The meeting in the park was quiet and undramatic in the way that important things sometimes are when the people involved have already done the emotional work in private and arrived at the actual meeting already changed. Agnes stood when Diane came through the east gate, which was a thing Agnes did when she meant it, and extended her hand, and Diane took it, and they looked at each other with the direct and measuring attention of two women who have each been through enough to know immediately whether they are in the presence of someone real. They sat on the bench, the three of them, with Jade at Agnes's end conducting a detailed report on Professor the Rabbit's recent achievements, which included successfully navigating a new form of obstacle course Jade had designed in the living room using couch cushions and a ruler. While Jade reported, Diane and Agnes spoke in the low, direct way of people who do not have time for anything but the actual thing. Diane said, I do not know how to accept something like this. Agnes said, you accept it the way you accept any true thing, which is by acknowledging it and deciding what to do next. Diane looked at the fountain. At the plaque. He walks past that every day, she said. He has, Agnes said. He will understand it differently now. Diane was quiet. Then she said, what he did for you. Coming across and sitting down. He did not tell me about it. He is not the kind of child who tells you about the good things he does. Agnes looked at Eli, who had moved down the bench to engage with Jade's account of the obstacle course and was asking specific questions about the ruler placement with the seriousness the topic clearly deserved. She looked at the stopped watch on his wrist and the two large gloves and the navy backpack worn pale along the straps. I know, Agnes said. That is precisely the kind of child he is. Diane looked at Agnes. Something passed between them that did not require words, the specific understanding of two people who have each, in their different ways, been paying close attention to the same person and have each arrived at the same conclusion about who that person is. The scholarship contact came in January, a letter, on paper, hand-delivered by a member of Agnes's foundation staff who had been instructed to go in person rather than to send it electronically, because Agnes understood by now that paper was the language of trust in this particular household. Diane read it twice at the kitchen table and then set it on the refrigerator next to the photograph of Marcus, below the yellow sun magnet. When Eli came home from school and saw it there, he stood in front of the refrigerator for a moment, reading it, and then he looked at the photograph of his father laughing at the picnic table with his head tilted back and his whole face open in it. He thought about the right order for making coffee. He thought about the specific quality of his father's full attention when it was given to you. He thought about what it meant to have had that, to have been given by two people who understood the weight of their gift, exactly what it meant to pay close attention to the world. He thought it might be enough to build anything from. He went to the park that afternoon and Agnes was on the bench and he sat down and told her about the letter on the refrigerator, and she listened with her full and complete attention, and when he finished, she poured tea into the thermos cap and handed it to him and looked at the fountain. "Good," she said. He wrapped both hands around the cap. The tea was Earl Grey, warm and real, with the floral thing underneath the dark that he had never found the vocabulary for and had stopped trying to name. Some things you did not need to name to know what they were. He had gotten the watch repaired in the second week of January. He had not planned to. He had passed a watch repair shop on the way home from school that he had not noticed before, and he had gone in and stood at the counter for a long time before he spoke. The man behind the counter had looked at the watch and said it was fixable and asked if Eli wanted it fixed. Eli had said he needed a day to think about it. He had gone home and thought about it and come back the next morning and said yes. He thought about this in the park on a January afternoon, turning the watch on his wrist. The hands were moving now, keeping time, the crystal still cracked but the mechanism underneath it working. Some things you held on to in the form they came to you in. Some things you carried forward into the next part. That was the thing he had been learning. It did not replace anything. It simply meant that the next part was possible. Agnes looked at the watch. "It is working," she said. "Since last week," he said. She looked at it for a moment. "Robert would have liked that," she said. "That you had it repaired instead of replaced." She looked at the fountain. "He always said that the whole point of fixing something is to keep the original thing. The repair is not the point. The continuity is the point." Eli looked at the watch. He thought about the right order for making coffee. He thought about the lesson in things like that, in how you hold on to what matters. "Yeah," he said. "I think I understand that now." They sat on the bench in the January afternoon as the city moved past the park on its ordinary business and the fountain stood with its stone plaque in the cold light and the pigeons made their distracted circuits along the path, and the bare oak trees waited, the way bare trees in winter wait, with the patience of things that know what they are and what they are going to be, with everything still present and the spring already in them whether it could be seen yet or not. Real kindness does not announce itself. It does not calculate or perform. It simply cannot walk away from someone sitting alone in the cold when everyone else has kept walking. And in not walking away, it sets something in motion that moves outward in every direction at once, touching things it never intended to touch, returning to the person who began it changed and fuller than before. Eli Carter did not sit down beside Agnes Whitfield because he knew who she was. He sat down because he knew what it felt like to be at the center of something large and invisible, and he could see that she was there too, and he had the particular kind of courage that is not dramatic but is harder to come by than the dramatic kind, the courage to respond to what you actually see rather than to look past it and keep moving. He could not have known that the woman on the bench had given that park to the city in her husband's name. He could not have known that the company threatening his family's home was hers. He could not have known that his one act of sitting would begin a chain of things that would secure his family's home and open the road toward his future and connect him to a woman who would, in the years that followed, become the kind of presence in his life that changes the shape of a life. He simply saw that she was alone and that she did not have to be. That was the whole of it. That was enough. Sometimes the moments that change everything do not feel like moments. They feel like a Tuesday afternoon. They feel like crossing a park in the cold. They feel like saying something ordinary that turns out to be the truest thing you could have said. And the people we walk past without looking are carrying things we cannot imagine, and the people who stop to look are rarer and more necessary than they know, and every single act of genuine presence, offered without calculation and without expectation of return, is already its own answer to every question worth asking about what it means to live a life that mattered. Thank you so much for watching until the very end. If this story moved you, check out the other videos on your screen right now. I think you are really going to love them. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do. It means the world and it helps stories like Eli and Agnes find the people who need them most. See you in the next story.